First off, a very, very warm welcome. Again, if you're looking for getting better at making better products, you are indeed in the right place. It's hosted by SDXD, San Diego Experience Design Professionals Network, where our values are to foster inspiration, connection, and education. A huge shout out to my fellow organizers, and I myself am James, president of SDXD. And I'd now like to hang it off to Taylor at MetaLab, our generous sponsor.
Hello, everybody. My name is Taylor and I work with MetaLab. We're so excited to be sponsoring. If you've been to any of the previous SDXD events, you'll notice that Brent significantly increased my my presentation here. So I'll try to fly through it so you guys can get to the goods that you actually came for. So a little bit about us. Collectively, we're about 140 people that are just really stoked about product. So we're based all over the world. We have HQs in both Victoria and Vancouver in Canada, but we hire the best no matter where they are. So if you haven't noticed, we do products. So where a lot of agencies claim to be full service, we don't. We do one thing and we do it really well, and that's build products. So over the past 14 years, we've shipped about 215 projects, which on average, I think that was 21 a year. Being a distributed team, we use a lot of these tools every day. Zoom, which we're on now. Some of our clients, next slide. Oh, we're moving all over the place. Missed our clients, but I guess the important part here is that we're hiring. So if you go to, I'll drop it in the chat, but metalab.com/careers, you'll see a handful of roles that we're currently hiring for. And we make sure when everybody comes out to visit us in Canada that they've got some mitts to keep them warm. But I'll hand it back to you, James. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks so much. Taylor, Brent, and MetaLab, we sincerely appreciate your support. Now, a little bit about tonight's agenda. We're going to start with a great presentation, followed by audience Q&A. And if you're available and interested, stick around for some optional breakout room networking. So now, on to our featured speakers for tonight. First off, we have Vidya, and she brings over 20 years of experience specializing in business and technology, strategy development, as well as product design, development, management, and innovation. She's held executive positions at Mitchell International and Intuit, and is currently co-founder at Product Rebels, where together with her fellow co-founder, Heather, she's coached teams from over 100 companies, ranging from startups to Fortune 50, to help them build better products and deliver delightful customer experiences. And Heather, a product management leader with over 17 years of delighting customers through design, development, and management of customer experiences. She spent over 13 years at Intuit, where she met Vidya and built a passion for customer-driven decision-making. So without further ado, let's give a warm welcome to tonight's featured speakers, Vidya and Heather. I'll hand off the SDXD virtual stage to you.
Thank you so much, James. I love the way that you just shared that you've got such a great, calming voice. I just want to listen to you like more. It's fantastic. Let's see, can everyone see this?
Yes.
Thank you. Thank you for that verbal. It's like I'm sort of trying to look at my screen and seeing if I've got any thumbs up. What we wanted to do, just while we get to know each other virtually, is this really cool little tool called Slido that we use. And you can either go to slido.com and enter that code, or just hold your phone up to the QR code, and it'll automatically just pop up this question, and we can just sort of see who's in the room. And while that's going, I just want to do a huge shout out to James and the team for welcoming us. It was incredibly so professional and just wonderful and warm, and just everyone sort of thought through everything. We can clearly tell that we're with a customer experience team. And just thinking about tonight, Heather and I talked to the Portland design thinkers about a month ago. And so that was the most fun. Don't tell anyone else, okay? But it was the most fun conversation, like the most challenging in terms of really kind of thinking about like what's right for the customer and how you're thinking about this. So we've got really sort of like, hey, no pressure, but a really high bar in terms of the expectation of questions we're going to get from all of you. So Heather, like, who do we have here? This is interesting.
Yeah, we've got UX designer, product designer, researcher, marketing director. Interesting. Associate product design, lots of design, which would be expected. We weren't sure if there was going to be some product management folks, some developers. So this is helpful to know.
This is cool.
Student design ops. That's a new one.
Yeah, and we've been talking a lot last year. We're talking a lot about product ops, so it's interesting that we've got design ops here now. That's really interesting. Student educator, cool. Okay, so that's just, you know, we're going to have a little bit more of this sort of interaction as we go along, but just to get us started, it's really helpful just to know who's out there. So thank you for playing along. Okay, let me see. I'm going to try and move the slide along. Here we go. What we want to talk to you about tonight is the 3 pillars of product management. It's based on a book that Heather and I just launched in November last year, and we're really excited to kind of bring these concepts. Now, we know that we're talking to a design team. We know that we're talking primarily to a group that just lives and breathes customer experience. So we're coming at this from a product perspective, but overall, Heather and I really think through all the time and focus on how do we bring a complete and utter focus to a customer and make that the core of how you make decisions and think about things. So that's the core of what we do. And the best way to start here is with some customer testimonials. We pull these right off the internet, and it's the best company I've ever seen. We'll never have a home without one. Thank you for making this so simple. These are the kind of quotes, right, that we want to hear. As people who build products, this is what we want people to say about our products. So we want to introduce you to what these products actually are. So let's start. Heather, what's this first one?
So this is Wise. I don't know how many of you have home security cameras. I do. I started with Ring, so I sort of stuck with Ring. And this company came out of not nowhere, but certainly is taking the US at least by storm with security cameras and just smart home technology overall. It's Wise. And you can just see by, you know, thank you for making this so simple. I love this Wise camera. This is the 6th one I've purchased. And the reason why this kind of chaps my hide is because Ring, you know, you're an entry point of $150. This little camera here is $20, totally easy to use, easy to network. They've just been fantastic. And I think they just got 50 million Series A financing just in the last year. They're doing really well.
Okay, so let's do the next one. And this little product is from Canada, like our sponsor. And look at the comments here. I absolutely love this thermostat, right? Anytime, you know, we get customer love in a review, you know, you're onto something. So this company, this is a few years old now. A couple of years ago, they got about 35 million from Amazon. And then last year they won Canada Product of the Year. And they I think poised to reach $1 billion. So this is significant. This is a product that's taken the world by storm. And we're going to talk to you a lot more about this, but just look, the word love is what we really focused on.
So I'm sure all of you have heard of USAA. And if you're lucky enough to have either been in the military or have married into the military or inherited a membership from USAA, you know what I'm talking about. This is, I've been lucky enough to have had USA for the last 20 years. We'll never leave them in terms of insurance, but also expanding into banking. You know, it's the best company I've ever seen. My banking experience with USAA has been outstanding. I've been with them for over 30 years and I've been with them for over 20. Huge, they are #1 in the country in terms of Net Promoter, which Video will talk about.
I'm so jealous about this one. It's like every time you talk about insurance, I do not talk about my insurance company this way or my bank. So I was gonna tease you with what these numbers meant, but Heather gave you a clue. So this is Net Promoter. It's all good. This is Net Promoter, and you know the one thing that you need to know is these numbers just represent just how incredible these products are. B2C products enjoy about sort of 60, 65, like world class. And B2B is around 50. So these products are amazing. And we could spend another hour just talking about Net Promoter. So if you ever want to hear about that, come talk to us. But we wanted just to tell you that these are world-class products because customers give that feedback.
Yeah, and we just talked mostly about B2C, but B2B is also possible, right? This is another great example company. It's Gusto. They are a payroll, online payroll service. They launched a while back, but they just received their Series D, I think 200 million infused cash. Their customers are in love with the payroll service. And I feel a little bit blasphemous because, you know, I was at Intuit for 13 years, was on the QuickBooks team, actually worked in the payroll group as well. So saying this is tough, but we love the ease of Gusto for HR resources such as payroll, benefits, and timesheets, the best online payroll provider I've ever used. I mean, you just can't say that about it's hard to say that about a B2B service, but it is possible.
Okay, so we just kind of gave you a few examples to just warm us up in the beginning of this talk and talking to you about world-class products. And looking at those reviews, looking at that Net Promoter, we probably feel all warm and fuzzy. They make it look easy, right? But in reality, we all work in product, and it is not easy to get those types of NPS scores and to get the word love out of your customer. And if you don't believe me, let's just go pick on some companies, okay? First is Google, our favorite, and this is Google Glass. I don't know if any of you out there remember this. My team about 5 years ago insisted that we get them. We believed all the marketing hype. We thought that was going to do amazing things to help our customer experience for one of our products. We got it. We spent about 3 months trying to work and integrate with this, and it was a complete and epic failure.
Nuco, enough said. I don't think we really need to go into that detail.
I'm going to move on. Oh, okay. This is another one that gives me PTSD. I don't know if any of you're probably all Mac users, but I'm still on Windows. Don't hate me for it. But Vista I couldn't get rid of it fast enough. It was so awful. It just made like using your computer almost impossible.
This one we threw in because it was fairly funny. You know, so picture the stereotypical, and if anyone in this audience rides a Harley, forgive me, but I think there's the stereotype that we all have about a Harley Davidson rider, right? Rough and tumble and maybe a beard, maybe just big guy. And so then picture a model wearing no shirt, riding on a Harley with long hair, tan, with this French accented narrator over the top, you know, narrating through the scene, talking about legendary eau de parfum from Harley Davidson. And as you can imagine, that didn't really go over very well. They really misread their audience. And very quickly, and actually the television commercial is actually on YouTube. It's pretty funny. I suggest you take a look at it. But they just completely missed the mark for their target user. The other one I think is a biggie, right? There are some big names in electronic health records. And if any of you work in healthcare, you know what I'm talking about. Some of the biggest companies out there, Epic being one of them, is dismal in terms of customer experience. You know, they were born out of regulatory requirements to capture data. They're trying to catch up with actually enabling physicians to do great healthcare, and most are struggling, and they have been for years. And so these are some big names here that just haven't gotten where they need to be.
Okay, so we kind of we started off on a sort of a high and then told you the reality that even big companies, right, with tons of resources and people and money, everyone can get it wrong. So what we want to talk to you is that how do you get onto the best foot possible? How do you build products that customers actually want? And just, you know, James gave us such a nice introduction. I'm not going to go through all of that. I just want to say that our experience is primarily in product, but we've led customer experience. We've worked with design teams, have many sort of different types of, all sorts of type of designers, research and so forth, all of them working towards a customer experience that's delivered for improving kind of customers' lives. And we wrote this book called Groundwork, Get Better at Making Better Products, which is what we want to talk to you about. So the first piece of it is we want to tell you why, like, why would you lay this groundwork? And for those of you who are working with product managers, speaking in a language that might resonate, you might be frustrated, it might be difficult to kind of try and get their attention about why you should focus on customers, why you need to do the research. We hope some of these stories give you a way in to have those kinds of conversations. Then we want to give you the 3 pillars of groundwork and talk to you about what those are. And finally, just really briefly touch upon practicing it back in your companies. So the first is we want to go back to and I'm going to run through some of these pretty quickly, but laying the groundwork in terms of these NPS scores, like what does that take? What does it mean to kind of get there? And in the 100+ companies that we work with, plus looking at the experience that we've had in various B2B, B2C, multiple industries, we found that there was some things that we had in common. And the first is the team got super clear on the problem that they actually wanted to solve. And for this, I just want to talk about Gusto, the HR software that we're feeling sensitive about as ex-Intuit people. But what they did was they really looked at the big players like the Intuits and others and said, no one's really serving that small business clearly. If you think about HR and you think about payroll, these small businesses, it's the solutions out there are way too complex. And so narrowing down to really what does that simple kind of a couple of things that each small business needs to do, and removing all the other pieces of the product was what they did. They got super clear on the need of that business owner. And I just want to give you a little bit of color. One feature that they actually introduced has been a delighter, and that is they allow the business owner to write a personal note with each of the payroll checks. Now, that kind of thing, right? Imagine that. Imagine in a big company having a personal note with every paycheck. It's kind of insane. But for a small business, which is all about retention, it's a family type of environment. They really care about connecting with their employees. That was super important, and that stood out as a feature. They only knew that because they were super clear on exactly what the person needed to do and why they needed to do it. The second is that they knew their customer inside and out. And this kind of goes beyond and we're going to talk to you about this as one of our pillars. It goes beyond just having a description of a customer. They intimately knew every one of these. So for this, I just want to talk about, the ring competitor for Wise that Heather spoke about. You would think that everybody would like a security system, that everyone would like something. But these security systems were incredibly expensive. And so what they did was they narrowed down to understanding who they actually wanted to choose. The customer, they picked someone who was really sort of tech savvy and wanted to be able to get something installed really quickly, had these different types of needs that these big companies with the lots and lots of security features just weren't serving. They boil it down to really understanding what these customers wanted. And finally, and this is nuanced, they connected the needs to the problem. And this is the biggest gap when we go into companies and we coach them. This is the biggest gap that we see. We see a lot of complexity around different problems. We see a lot of complexity about different segments. But what we don't see is a one-to-one correlation between the problem, what the customer actually needs, and be able to articulate that in a way that you can make a decision and actually do something about it. These are the core of what the customer, this is what every great company has in common. But there's things that we see when it's not working. What are those, Heather?
Yeah, so, when you don't have a really clear problem you're solving or who you're solving it for, narrowed set of users, for instance, then it's hard to say no. Right? It's hard to say no when the sales department comes up with a really great idea, or the CEO comes in and says, hey, I talked to a client and they said that they want to see this. I think we should do it. They might all be fantastic ideas, But what happens is if we don't have a really clear understanding of the problem we're solving or who we're solving it for, then it's hard to say no. You have no justification to say no. What usually then happens is everything gets thrown in the backlog. Everything gets thrown into the roadmap. Everything gets thrown into our priority list. And we start getting overwhelmed by the number of priorities, and it's hard to make sense of all of it and when to do it and how to do it. And it becomes pretty frustrating. Also, when you don't have clarity around what you're solving for, the problem you're solving for, and who you're solving it for, a lot of times you start getting stuck into opinion-based decisions, right? A lot of people have good opinions, have seen or talked to one person, one customer, have talked to one investor, have talked to one of the leadership team. And so you start going back and forth and get stuck in these opinion-based decisions, which then winds up with the next opinion that walks into the room. The decisions usually get overturned. So either you're delaying your decisions because there's too many opinions, or you make a decision and the next maybe highest paid opinion in the company or in the group or in the room comes over and the decision gets overturned. So that really is the big struggle with not having some of these pillars set or having some of these sort of basic groundwork set. And what happens is customers usually end up unhappy. Why is that? You have too many priorities. You're solving for absolutely everything and not one thing really well. So we'll talk a little bit more about that later. But what usually ends up happening is customers are confused. What's the value proposition here? Or they're reading through a really complex experience because we tried to solve for everything, right? Or you've got so many products that it's hard to maintain, and therefore a lot more unhappy or a lot of experience issues start to come into play because you're trying to manage way too much. So the end of the game is, the end of this, the challenges of not defining these is really unhappy customers, direct correlation. So how many, this is another little interactive exercise, how many of you guys have experienced any of these in the last 30 days? One person has experienced all of these. I'm so sorry for you.
I am so sorry. Oh my gosh.
Oh, that sucks. And believe me, Kitty and I have experienced all of these. In every one of the companies, we've experienced at least one of these, and it's painful. Hard to prioritize is probably one of the biggest challenges that we see in every product, broad product team. It's really hard to prioritize. And this is usually an indication that there's not a clear sort of direction set through the problem, who you're solving for, and sometimes that's a reflection of strategy as well. Difficulty saying no. Yep, good. These are pretty consistent with what we see. Confused teams. Yeah. Imagine, I mean, the development teams get really, frustrated when we keep changing priorities, as does UX. I mean, frankly, the entire dev team suffers.
Yeah, and I think especially when I think about design teams, this lack of prioritization and then going back and forth by what's more important, which often changes, is probably the most frustrating, I think the consequence of these types of issues. Okay, really helpful. You can continue to play along. I mean, we'll go back and take a look at all of this. It's really interesting data for us as well. So thank you for playing. So let's move to the three groundwork pillars. So we teased you in terms of like this is a little why, and this is why it's so important to get these things right. So we're going to talk about the convergent problem statement as the first pillar. I'm going to take you through that. Heather's going to take you through persona, and then we'll tag team individualized needs. So let's start with the first one. And these are the three groundwork pillars that allow you to do getting better at building better products. The reason we like to start with the convergent problem statement is that we're all problem solvers, every single one of us, whether you're in product design, development, or wherever in the triad of product development you are. We all like figuring out solutions. We're good at it. We kind of we're good at problem solving. We're good at thinking about ideas. And what that means is that we talk features, and most teams, and Heather talked about the overturned decisions and the opinion-based debates. It's because we talk features and we can argue about features. What we really want to do is pull the team back and us as product practitioners back to talking about what the customer challenge actually is, and then to explore what the set of problems around this particular challenge might be. Now, at Intuit, we used to call this go broad to go narrow. In design thinking, we call it convergent and divergent thinking. There's lots of different ways of explaining this, but the key here is to pick a specific problem. And as we talk about the problem set, we can speak to the nature of the problem, how strong it is, and then we can bring in the business issues and needs and where the company is going. But it starts with identifying and picking a customer problem. So the way that we define it is a convergent problem statement expresses the difficulty your customer is dealing with, stated with no attempt to address possible solutions. And that's the key. There's no solution when we're talking about problems. So let's bring this back to life for you. Remember the Ecobee? Well, I don't have that. This is the thing that I have in my house. And if you think about a thermostat, and maybe this looks familiar to many of you, there's a bunch of numbers. I don't know what most of these things do. I don't use any of these buttons. I tend to go up and down based on what the temperature of the house looks like. And I couldn't tell you what all the different combinations of these can be. And so you can imagine if a team, and we're sitting there thinking about redesigning this thermostat, we might say something like, the home temperature systems are really not easy to use, right? They what we really like to have is simple, bold numbers that we could actually see clearly. And what we want to be able to do, because it's kind of cool and it's an IoT feature and it's kind of fun, is wouldn't it be cool if we could control all of this from our smartphones? So what we've done here, and this is typical, we sort of picked on the thermostat. This is typical of what we see in a lot of teams. People talk in features. We see problems and we go straight to how we would solve them. And so one company out there decided to do just that. They came up with a solution based on those features. And if you look at this, you can see that it has simple, bold numbers. It is definitely connected to your smartphone. And there's not a lot you can do. And it's actually pretty attractive as a device, right? It's easy to read. So they launched this, and this is what customers actually said. And these are reviews we pulled exactly off the site. Love the idea, but it almost resets itself and changes the temperature setting all day long. This thing has ended up costing me money due to a poorly thought out program. Ouch, that hurts. Nothing worse than waking up in the middle of the night in a sweat because it's 87 degrees in the house. So clearly this is a failure, right? Clearly this is a product that did not get those rave reviews. So what I want to do is to imagine that we went back and as a UX team, as a product team, we actually go back and we think about the challenges, right? We talk to customers, we look at them and we say, what are we actually dealing with? So here are some of the problems that we might have encountered. Apart from the display being unreadable, we could say, look, our schedule changes day to day, and so do our heating needs. This is why we're turning the heat up and the cooling up and down. Those defaults just simply don't work for me. I'm spending way too much money on energy. The temperature should match the weather. Why can't it just know? And so what we want to do is, as we explore this world of problems, is that we want to converge and we want to pick on one. So based on our research, and take a giant leap with me, based on our research, we're going to say that our root cause problem, the one that we converged to, was that it's actually never the right temperature in the house. Now we have a specific problem that we can think about. And what we want to do is to ask people to articulate it with a few things in mind. First of all, I'm just going to read this to you and then I'll break it down. So homeowners have multiple cold and hot zones in the house. They find it annoying and confusing figuring out how to set temperatures and zones automatically. So they constantly change the thermostat manually. Maybe that resonates with some of you. I know it resonates with me. Now, if we break this down, here are the elements that we have. The first is that we've identified a very specific problem. The problem is that your house isn't even. There's multiple cold and hot zones everywhere. The second is that we pulled out an emotion. We talked about the frustration that customers feel when they're dealing with this type of product. Then we said, what is the root cause? The root cause is because of these hot zones, they're constantly changing the thermostat manually. We understand what the problem is, and we haven't anywhere said anything about a feature. We didn't talk about a display. We didn't talk about connecting to a smartphone, nothing. We simply talked about the problem. And so what happened as a result of this, and we're taking another jump. If anyone works for Ecobee, come and talk to us, because we'd love to know exactly what happened behind closed doors. But what Ecobee did was that they designed, and you can see it's beautifully featured, but what they did was they addressed the problem. Rather than just the display on the wall, they had these tiny little devices that they put around the home. So what you hear a customer say is, my Ecobee reads the temperature in the living room where I'm sitting, and it ignores the temperature where the thermostat actually exists. And this is the best part, they solve the problem. They're no longer hotspots in the house. And that probably explains why this product has taken off like wildfire. Taking a giant step back up to our 20,000 level. This is from our book. It's a quote that we love using. People don't want a 1/4 inch drill, they want a 1/4 inch hole. You're probably very familiar with this quote. In our book, I know, shameless plug, we actually dive deeper and we talk about, well, what do they want the 1/4 inch hole to do? That's how deep we want to get. And we give you a bunch of different examples and have fun with this example, playing with, like, what does it really mean to converge on a specific problem? So what we want to do is to have you all have that conversation with your product team, with your development team, with your peers about what problem are we trying to solve for our customer. Let's stop talking about features and have that conversation about the actual problem. All right, next part of interaction. That was our first pillar. I'd love you to grab your phones again and play with us and just tell us, like, when you think about your priorities or your backlog or however you shape your roadmap, how many of the things that you're working on right now have a clear problem statement? Okay, cool. Most, that's awesome. Cool, some. Okay. Nice. That's what we're seeing. We're seeing that it's been shifting. It's been shifting more. I think there's more and more conversations having around the problem, and we're making progress. That's really the mission that we're on. We want everything to start, every priority to be framed as a problem. So that's cool. Okay, some of you, not many, we've got work to do. Okay, thanks for sharing that. That also, it's pretty typical, this split here. Usually it's a little bit more, the 25% that were in great shape, don't leave. That's fantastic. Usually these numbers are more like about 10%. So, okay, thank you. Thanks for sharing that. And let's move on.
All right, so we just talked about what we're solving for. Now we're going to talk about who we're solving for. And we call this the actionable persona. So this is a UX audience, so you're probably not rolling your eyes. But Vidya and I, in most teams that we step into, roll their eyes when we talk about personas. They either sit on the shelf forever, they've never used them. Oh, that's UX does it for us, and they use them. They used them about 3 months ago when we were to redesign this part of the experience. So they really aren't used. I think they've gotten a really bad rap over the last 10 years or more, actually. I think the original lifeblood of good personas and being disciplined about actually creating them in design has really moved away because of this bad rap. Vidya and I have learned a lot about what makes a persona actually actionable, and that's why we're calling it the actionable persona. So throw away kind of what you've seen in the past. Vidya and I talk a lot about what makes them actionable in our book. And we're gonna first talk about why they aren't actionable today. So I'm just gonna go through a couple example personas. The first one is Brent. So this is an actual persona. CEO, he's been in the industry 33 years, age 54, he's attended 14 events. I focus on what will drive improvements and profits in my company. Shouldn't that be every CEO? I'm not sure this is really helpful in helping us design an experience for him or his employees, right? If I'm thinking about B2B. So I'd give this one kind of an F. There's not really much here about Brent that will help me make product decisions. Let's see if we can get a better one. Helena, head of HR, married, 3 children, been with the company 10 years, skews female, okay. Age 30 to 45, suburban. All right, well, I guess if I'm developing a product related to civic engagement, that might help me. I don't know, maybe. Identifiers, calm demeanor. Okay, so I'm getting a little bit more about her, right? So maybe I want, calming colors in my application. Like, what is this telling me, right? And these are actual personas. And so you can see how this and the last one are going to sit on shelves. They're not really actionable. They're basically playing lip service to personas, right? And what usually ends up happening is when you are building personas like this, the team usually ends up solving for every customer the same exact way, because they don't truly have personas that they can take action on or make decisions on. And so what Vidya and I have done is try to figure out how to make personas actionable, because we truly believe in personas, which I'm sure everyone in this audience does as well. The definition is simple: living archetype of your primary target customer. Same that we've been talking about for years, representing similar behaviors and characteristics among a group of individuals, actively used in day-to-day decisions. So how do we make them actionable? Let's start with Gusto. I want to pretend for a moment that we are the product team for Gusto, and we are talking about the payroll person, the person that's running the payroll in the company, right? So here's some information that we have about that payroll person. Female, age 34 to 50, married, 2 kids, employed, blah, 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 blah. Exactly what we don't need in designing an experience. So what do we need? We actually need to know more about her, right? We call this demographic versus psychographic sort of understanding of our customer. You all have heard of this, right? What does she care about? What does she make? How does she make decisions? What keeps her up at night? What does she wish for? So these are all, I'm sure everyone in this audience is, yeah, I get it, right? We've kind of gone one step further, and we've thought about these character trait spectrums. This is just a bunch of words that relate to something that you all have thought about. We've just put a name to it. And what we think about are traits of an individual that, depending on where they sit on a spectrum within this trait, help us think about how to approach designing an experience for them. So an example, in this case, which you all have probably thought about if you're designing software, you are thinking about tech savvy versus tech phobic. I know Vidya and I, for every software product that we've ever had our hands on, that is one element of understanding how we might think about designing the experience for somebody, right? It's a spectrum that tells us, okay, how do we need more hand-holding? Do we need inline support? How many steps does this need to take because they need a little bit more hand-holding than the next guy, right? That's that's what we're calling a character trait spectrum that can be very helpful in designing an experience. There are more. Let's talk about payroll specifically. She can be controlling or delegating, right? That's two opposite sides of the spectrum that, depending on where this person, this payroll person is, might help us think about what kind of experience we build. For instance, if she's more delegating, she might, or we might, define an experience that allows her to send invites to all of the employees that they can fill out their profiles for her, right? So she can delegate that information out and she doesn't need to deal with it, right? That might be one way you think about more of a delegating model versus a controlling model. Another spectrum that Vidya has up here on the screen is accuracy, sort of data accuracy versus efficiency. That isn't quickly thought of as the same spectrum, right? But oftentimes for products like this, so QuickBooks was a perfect example. We had, or even TurboTax, right? We had to take some hit on efficiency, getting a person through a task, in order to help them understand and open up what we considered sort of a black box around a particular calculation, so that we built confidence along the experience. So at times we were trading these two off, depending on where data accuracy was way more important for a target user than the efficiency of a task. And so sometimes those are trade-offs. These were 3 character trait spectrums that I'm bringing up that apply to payroll, probably accounting, other financial related stuff, but there are other character trait spectrums out there depending on your industry. And so we challenge you to be thinking about what kind of character trait spectrums are important and relevant to how you're thinking about your users, that you can place them in these spectrums to help you define and approach the design of the experience that better targets and better delights your user. So what if we were designing the onboarding experience for this payroll person, right? Why don't we, let's jump into that a little bit and think about who this payroll person is. Her name's Jennifer. Some of the attitude she holds, right? If it's not accurate, it doesn't go out. I check everyone's work. Okay, so she's very much on the data accuracy point, right? I know what I'm doing, just let me get started. Okay, that could mean tech savviness. Let's say she's very tech savvy, but also very experienced in payroll. As I think about an onboarding experience, I might have a goal of my onboarding experience is to have her cutting her first payroll check in 20 minutes, right? As opposed to creating an elongated handheld tour of the experience, right? So that's one input into how to make an actual persona, but this is one input. Her behaviors and her attitudes are helpful in designing this experience. But as we think about B2B, there's more than one user or more than one persona that we have to think about, right? In this case, we have a buyer. In some cases, we might have a buyer and a decision maker. In this case, the buyer is the decision making Carol. She's the owner of this business. And we want to know the interactions between that user and that buyer. And so in this case, I need to be up to date on the numbers to know if we're going to meet our commitments every month. Ah, okay, that's interesting. So in the onboarding experience for Jennifer, I might help her set up a quick report out through text or a quick flag to show her what the cash balance is before I hit the submit button for payroll checks for the month, right? Have her set that up through the onboarding experience. So before her first paycheck processed, she can show her what the cash balance will be at the end of the payroll process, right? So again, it's the interaction of the two, the user versus the buyer, that helps me understand how to design for the experience for Jennifer, in this case, the payroll person. The bottom line that we are talking about here, which I'm sure isn't new for this audience, is we need to talk about the real person, right? We need to talk about their real emotions, their attitudes, their beliefs, their interactions between the different users in the company, or between different constituents or stakeholders in their lives, right? TurboTax was a perfect example. We had to think about the interactions between their vendors that were, or their inputs into their tax return, 1099 providers, 1098 providers. Like, how are we thinking about those interactions given what we know about the user? But it's minimal demographics. Vidya and I hardly ever spend any time in demographics when defining an actionable persona, unless it matters. Now, don't get us wrong. Demographics help because you want personas to be used across the company, right? You don't want 10 different personas for the same person. And the demographics matter for marketing, right? You need to filter, they need to target, there's things that they need the demographics for. So it's not completely avoided, but it's not critical for designing and making personas actionable to facilitate product decisions. That's the point we're making here. So let's talk about your personas. Let's do another little interactive exercise. How many of your personas are actionable? Okay. Kind of, sort of, I got it.
Wow, kind of, sort of, is everyone. Be interesting to see what it would take for you to move them to totally actionable. When you're sitting there, kind of, sort of. If you'd like to put that in chat, we'll totally be looking at that later. We're going to open it up to questions and chats, but super interesting.
Yeah, what personas? We usually see the kind of, sort of, and the well, and nope, not a yet. We actually see more of that. So this is a UX audience, so I would assume that there's a lot more folks that are focused on getting good personas.
Yeah, I think it's really tough when you say what personas, and like, especially, I'm sure you're all convinced that you need them. I'm kind of getting into the environment, and a lot of the time being able to just put 2 or 3 characteristics and talk about why you made the decision that way, I think is a really interesting way to have a conversation with a product manager or someone else on the team. Because what you're doing is you're connecting your research or your insights to what the customer said, and you're kind of doing a persona without calling it a persona, because again, we know where you're coming from. A lot of teams, it's just really hard to kind of get over that hurdle, because marketing owns personas, and we're like, well, that's well and good, but product teams need them day to day.
The other question we should have asked Vidya, and maybe our next UX talk we do, I think it would be interesting to hear from this audience on, how many of your personas, or how many of you have product people, product managers, product owners, and devs that actually look at personas, or is it really isolated to the UX team? That's another phenomenon we see, which is product managers, and this is why we find it so important, should be in the development of personas with their UX team. Like, this should be, they should be holding on to these, walking from meeting to meeting, because they're pretty critical in making decisions.
Yeah, it's one of the first things we actually do is when we come into coach teams, is to get the product managers to go out and talk to the UX teams, and actually it's usually met with sort of warm arms and embraces, just to say we're interested in the conversation and how we form these. But that's really interesting. Okay, got to keep moving, and we're going to move to the last pillar, which is individualized needs. And as I said, this is a little nuanced, because when we think about, it's really simple. If you've got one problem and you've got one persona, and you can go, okay, well, that's really easy. There's that person's needs, and let's go solve for them. But the reality is we live in a complicated world, right? Where you're dealing with a bunch of different problems, even within a single product set. You're dealing with multiple segments, and marketing and sales and accounting just want to go more and more. You want to grow the business. And so understanding and kind of getting to an individualized need is so critical in making good decisions. And this is a third pillar that we think absolutely has to be in place. And the way we define it is it's aspects of a problem for a particular persona that your solution must address. And it can be any need. It can be an inefficiency. It can be something around the context of the environment the customer is in. It could just be a baseline. But what we've done is we've aligned a problem and a persona with a need. And we want to show you what that looks like. So why don't we start with the example back in home security? I'm going to go back, throw this back to Heather and say, look, shouldn't every single person in the world have a home security camera?
Amen. Yeah. But when you start thinking about the individual users of the security camera, you start to really, think about how different their needs might be. You may design it differently for one over the other. So let's talk about a few, and we're going to go back to whys. So let's talk about the few users here, right? These are, we've thought about, Jane. She's a nurse, just moved into a rented apartment, lives alone. Then we have Peter, lives in the suburbs, owns his own home, has a young family, travels a lot for business. And then Angie, she's a student, lives in a rented house with 3 roommates in a rundown part of the city. So all of these, yeah, you could kind of see how you might think about the experience or what the needs are of Jane versus Peter versus Angie. There might be some overlap, but how do you really get down to a set of needs for Jane, a set of needs for Peter, a set of needs for Angie, so that you know what trade-offs you're making, right? And we start by, we have to identify each of them and individualize them for each persona, but we start by observational research. We love observational research, which is such a bummer in the time of COVID because it makes it really hard. But observational research is, something near and dear to Vidya and I's heart, and totally ingrained in us through our experience at Intuit. For any of you that might work there now, they used to have a program called the Follow Me Home program, which is kind of a creepy term now that I think about it. But we would actually follow users home or follow them to their business, and we would plant ourselves there, and we would just observe them in their environment. You all in this audience know what observational research is and how invaluable it can be. But this is where you really develop empathy, right? You're developing empathy for these users. You're sitting in their shoes. And through that empathy, you're able to individualize or really identify critical needs for each of the users or the folks that you're observing, right? And when you individualize these needs, you're able to prioritize them. So how painful is this one particular observation in being able to complete this task, right? So you're truly understanding each of the needs of each of these personas. You're doing observational research for each of these personas so that you can individualize and prioritize these needs effectively, so that you have a very clear understanding of the problem, but then you're connecting that to your persona and the list of prioritized needs for that persona. So if you can move a couple slides, Vidya. So let's say we've done some observational research with Angie, Peter, and Jane. And let's talk about Jane first. Let's talk about what we observed. I'm always coming home from work at odd hours of the night. I live in the Pacific Northwest, lots of interesting weather. I'm not handy. I only buy things that work out of the box. I'm on a limited budget. Okay, so you might kind of see how you might approach a Wise camera or a security camera for Jane, right? Peter, I travel a lot and always try to stay connected everywhere I can. I have multiple entry points at my home that need coverage. The kids leave the doors open. It stresses me out. I can install and fix anything. And then finally, Angie. It's pretty dicey after dark. My neighbor just got robbed. I want to check on my dog, see if he's tearing things up. She lives in a rented apartment. I'm forgetful and sometimes leave the door unlocked. I live in the Midwest, lots of crazy weather. So you can kind of see there's some overlap here, right? But then there's some very interesting, while we think all three of these folks need a security camera, there's some, you start to really see some differences in how you might think about each of these personas. And what we find a lot of is that companies want to solve for all of them. And when you think about all the features that are possible in a video, in a security cam, right? You got case material and size, the capabilities of the camera, any adjacent security features like door locking, price, power source. There are so many different things, potential features and capabilities. How do you make a choice? And that's what we're here to talk about, and how to be able to make the choice. A lot of companies don't make the choice. So they try to solve for everyone, and what they usually end up with is feature bloat. And, Vidya talked about Vista, the Vista software application or the OS. What she didn't mention was right after they released the OS, many big media came out and said, you've got to disable like 13, they specified 13 different features to disable immediately because it just weighed down and made the OS way too complex. And so that's not the situation you want to get in, right? We all want to be able to we want to make decisions confidently between the users and based on the needs that they have. So how do we do that, Vidya?
Yeah, no, it's you brought up Vista again. I'm like starting to shake again. So Heather talked about Jane and Peter and Angie, and we saw the different needs that they have. And so what we want you to do is to, first of all, take these observations and turn them into needs. And that's the first step that a product manager and a UX person do hand in hand. We're translating it. So we've done this for you. You know, Heather talked you through the observational research. So for Jane, we're actually translating her needs into these 4. She needs to illuminate her entry. The product needs to work in nasty weather. She has a need to not have to do any sort of difficult installation, and she's got a price concern. As we now think about Peter and we do that translation, he's got some different ones. He's going to need to check when he's on the road. It needs to cover multiple areas because he's got a home with multiple entry points. It needs to be able to lock up when he's not there, because remember, he's traveling. And he's pretty comfortable with a DIY installation. And then finally, Angie, the last translation will do. She wants to be able to keep her entry well lit. She needs to be able to see her dog around the house. She also wants to be able to lock up when she's not there, and it needs to work in nasty weather. So what we've done now is individually, and this is so important, because what we end up seeing a lot of the time is that these get kind of munged together, and then people pull out a specific set of needs or features. At the very worst case, they do what Heather said, which is like, we're going to just do everything, right? We're going to just put every feature and just kind of make our product roadmap, every single thing that we can do. The other things that we see is that we see these commonalities. Well, Jane and Angie both need this idea about having sort of well lit. So maybe what we do is, you know, that's a feature we should work on, because hey, 2 of our segments have this. Here's another one. Peter and Angie have this idea about remote locking. We should probably think about that feature and put that in the development queue. And you can go on. You can start seeing this pattern matching, and you can build a backlog that way. Don't do that. That's the first thing we don't want you to do. We don't want you to have a laundry list. We don't want you to start with Jane and then move sequentially all the way through to Angie, thinking we're just going to actually kind of go ahead and it's randomly picking a set of features to work on and going through all of them. What we do want you to do is to pick. And remember, we talked about a convergent problem. We understand Peter. We've defined the persona. We've done the observational research that Heather talked about. And what that means is that we've identified and we've individualized a set of needs that we can prioritize. Now, there are some business reasons why we picked Peter. First of all, he's got multiple products that he's going to buy. So, you know, we immediately think, okay, there's multiple sort of like, we're going to earn more from Peter. But it's really clearly defined. It's a target that we can go after, that the marketing, the sales, the account team, everyone in the organization can rally around. And it's not to say that it's Peter and no one else. This is a matter of priority. So when we start with Peter, we've identified needs. We can then go to, well, it looks like Angie has the next biggest need. There's a commonality here. Perhaps in our roadmap, we're going to identify that Angie is the next persona that we're going to focus on. But in terms of individualizing these needs, it allows us to have these trade-offs and these discussions that are not opinion-based. Remember, right back to the beginning of the conversation when we said this was one of the biggest problems. Here, we're talking specifically about an individual, their needs, and then talking about the business overarching and talking about where we can start. And that's how we want you to think about it. We want you to start with these 3 pillars by identifying the problem, then choosing the persona, understanding them, going through the character trait spectrum. And then once we've got a set of needs, prioritizing against one single alignment. And if you do that, what we have is that we put the groundwork in place. So these 3 pillars are the core of what we talk about. And I just want to hand it over to Heather to say, well, how would we actually bring this into, how would you start bringing this into your place of business?
Yeah, so I also wanted to just touch on one thing, Vidya, before you move forward. This, that was a B2C example, right? And it is tough for B2B. Don't get us wrong. But it is doable in B2B, which is you're starting really with prioritization of your personas, right? And that will be fluid over time, right? During one phase of your roadmap, you might be very focused on one or two of your personas. Let's say you're a SaaS application, you're focused on one or two of your personas, you understand their needs and how they're prioritized, and you're making those trade-offs actively and making prioritization calls between your personas over time such that you're making decisions confidently and that make the most impact. But it does come down to knowing your personas really well, having individualized set of needs per persona so that you can actively make trade-offs and know what's the impact of that trade-off is, right? If I prioritize one feature over another for this persona, I know that I'm going to be impacting this particular persona. So, sorry, I digress. We just get a lot of questions about B2B, and I want to make sure that it's clear that it is possible, although a little bit tougher, but it is possible to establish this and have it work. So our groundwork, we talked about, this is our book. We just covered the three main pillars of our book, right? Pillar one, the first thing is really just talking about the problem. Go to your product team meeting tomorrow and make sure that you and your team have established the exact same problem. Ask the question, right? Second is actionable persona. Do you have one? Can you make a decision utilizing your persona for your next big feature discussion, right? Is your persona actually helping you make that decision? And then third is, do you have a set of individualized needs for your persona? Those are the three big pillars. But what we didn't talk about today that is also in our book is how to do that. Some practices that help you establish these pillars more easily and ever evolve them. So you're constantly validating and further solidifying those pillars. And the first is developing a hypothesis. So we leverage hypotheses as a rudder for our research for everything. And we go into some details around how to do that well so that your research is outcomes oriented, right? That you're going to be solving the question that you need to get answered so that you can make a decision. The second is conducting scrappy research. Vinny and I love big research projects. They all have their place and time. But we are huge advocates of ongoing scrappy research so we can inform as many decisions as we can with customer-backed insights. And so that can happen if you have a really good, successful scrappy research practice. So we talk a lot about how to do that. And then the third practice is what we call getting commitment. It's challenging making product trade-offs when there's a ton of opinions. You've got multiple leaders that have multiple objectives and sometimes competing objectives, and knowing how to drive commitment across a cross-functional organization with competing commitments based off of everything you've learned from your customer and helping drive the product forward is critical. Again, this is helpful for product managers, but I think it's a leadership, for me, it's a leadership practice across any cross-functional organization within the product functions. It's a really helpful practice and some techniques in there to take on to enable that. So that's groundwork in a nutshell. And so we're going to stop there and open this up for questions or thoughts or anything, comments.
Thank you so much, Heather and Vidya, for that outstanding presentation. Oh, sorry, Vidya.
Thank you.
No, I was just saying, I'm looking at the chat, but please go ahead, James.
Oh, sounds good. I was just going to introduce Howie. He's our head of speaker relations, and he's got a lot of great questions that folks submitted while registering for this event. And of course, in the chat, we're keeping an eye on those as well. So I'll hand it off to him to feature those questions.
Hello, everyone. So we got some great questions here. I had to go through them, and I did take a few out that were already answered during this great show. So if I somehow didn't cover it correctly, feel free to continue typing into our chat and asking questions as we go along. So to start off, and I might butcher some of these names, so I apologize. We have a Zedquil Avila, and they're asking, how do you formulate questions for product users in order to maximize engagement and define actionable tasks?
And I'm assuming, I don't see that in the chat, so there's an assumption. So if you're online, please put it in the chat if we're not going the right direction. But in terms of actually talking to users about a product, is that how I would define it, Howard? Is that how you're reading the question?
Or let me type it in the chat. Maybe it's a little easier right there. Do you see it right there?
Yeah, perfect. Formulate questions, use it, maximize engagement and define. Yeah, that's a great question. Because of the hypothesis, that first practice, what we'd like to do, because I think there's a lot of research that happens, and anytime you talk to a customer, I'm sure every single person in this virtual room has experienced it, you get rich data. And then you come back and it's open for interpretation. So what we'd like to do is we always like to start our research with a hypothesis. And by that is a definition of what we believe to be true, what we believe to be learned, given everything that we know with the market, with the environment, with customers and so forth. So then when you're going into a research, you're specifically going in and testing your hypothesis. So rather than it being completely open-ended, even in discovery, we still like to come in with a hypothesis-based set of questions. What you're listening for and you're learning is, am I proving or disproving the hypothesis that I have? And that single action, that discipline, just to say we're going to start with a hypothesis, immediately changes the ability for it to be actionable, because you have a result from your set of research. And again, Heather talked about scrappy research. I'm sure you're all familiar with all the academic texts that tell you it's between 5 and 7 in terms of getting a directional result. So that's the first. In terms of maximizing engagement, there's a set of steps, and we talk a lot about this in the book, and we talk more about this in our coaching, is how do you set up a set of questions to get to understanding the hypothesis, but start by getting them warmed up. You connect with them. You tell them exactly what you're using the research for. You get them engaged by saying what you're going to do with that information. You go through your set of questions, and then there's a set of various techniques that we could spend the next hour talking about. And many of you are probably way better and experts than we are. But in our experience over 20 years, we've learned a way to engage that we've tried to bring in terms of how to do scrappy research in the book. So hopefully you can take a look at that.
Amazing. And our next question is from Christina. Sorry, I don't have the last name here. I'm going to put this in the chat real quick. And she's asking, how often are you touching base with the users? And are you using agile methodologies like Scrum frameworks to make this a part of sprint goals?
Yes. And we are actually, we treat scrappy research as sort of an ongoing practice. So Vidya and I and our teams, we would be setting lunches every week, once or twice a week, to talk to customers. So I would say when you take a look at our scrappy research practice, it's about just an ongoing relationship with users. It's not really an event. And so we try to create operating mechanisms within our teams, within even our extended teams with dev and UX and product management, for an ongoing dialogue, whether that be through weekly brown bag lunches, listening in on support calls. We're in constant communication, and our scrappy research is sort of ongoing. In terms of agile, we are using agile methodologies. Oftentimes I find timing with agile, trying to force research into agile, we're trying to keep an ongoing relationship with customers, so we're informing our decisions as we go. So we're timing our ongoing research and those hypotheses in a way that informs the sprint planning, right? So we're sort of timing that ongoing touch point and making sure that when we are touching base with our customers around one particular hypothesis and those set of questions, we're doing it in a timely manner so that we can actually impact the sprint planning process. So hopefully that makes sense. Vidya, if you wanted to add to that.
Yeah, the only quick thing I'd add is that ideally it's weekly. You said how often are you touching base with your users? It's weekly. And again, it's not many, it's brief. It can be done within hours, 1 or 2. It's not like it's taking a huge amount of your time availability, but we think it's so important to keep that connection alive with your customers. And, you know, clearly it's bigger for when you're doing discovery. It's different when you're going into heuristics, or you're kind of trying to think about product launches. You have different research needs, but on an ongoing basis as part of a discipline, we say weekly.
Yeah, and one thing I want to add on top of that, sorry, is we try to get our extended teams involved. So when Vidya and I are talking to customers, we're recording, right? We're recording the conversation, and we're having a weekly brown bag lunch that our devs can hear what our customers are telling us, right? So it's sort of, we're trying to ensure that we all have the same baseline of understanding of our customers, and so that we're making more efficient decisions with more confidence, because everyone has heard from the horse's mouth, so to speak, the problem at hand and how they're reacting to either a concept that we've just shown them, or have identified a problem, and now we can go right into ideation, right? But having the extended team sort of hear as much as they possibly can from the horse's mouth is really helpful in this sort of ongoing relationship with customers.
All right. And the next question is from a Gary Koenig, and I'm sorry, I believe it's a he, asks, how do I convince product and engineering teams that we need more research when they think they know everything about our customers already?
Oh, okay. Oh gosh, that's a great question. I think the best way that I've done this, when you've got we already know, and again, Heather and I have been in situations, you've come in and we're like, we know what the customer needs, is do that research. You might need to do it on your own time a little bit. You need to probably get over a little bit of a hurdle, but you need to surprise them, right? So take something that you believe is not true, because I'm sure you're asking this question because you can see things that that they believe they know that they really don't know. And what you want to do is, Heather talked about the horse's mouth. What you want to do is you want to bring a video, a little set, a little camera. I mean, we're all on Zoom these days, so just tape a little interview and surprise them. And I don't think it's going to be hard to do given your question. That's what's worked for us. Bring them along next time to some of the research that you do. You're going to have to take some baby steps, but you could try and convince all day long. I've never found it very successful when you're trying to argue with someone about the need. If you can show them the proof and it can come directly from the customer, that actually gets people's attention, and you might make a couple of those inroads to then have that conversation and then get them involved in doing some more primary research.
All right, and up next, and everyone that's still asking questions, don't worry, we'll get to your questions right away. We're going down a separate list that we have on the back end here, but we'll definitely get to yours. The next question is Athena Lai, and she asks, how do you make sure you've correctly identified the product's features and solutions that successfully address the customer's problems?
So you can do that really easily. Vidya and I do a lot of what we call sort of trial ballooning, and it's, concept tests with the most rudimentary rudimentary concepts or feature lists, and ask for prioritization versus, need versus use. There's a bunch of ways that you can get at testing that notion really quickly. Again, Vidya talked about 5 to 7 users, a simple concept with a simple set of features with maybe a couple drawings of screens if it's software, or a mini prototype, just to validate your assumptions, right? And understand whether or not you've actually, one, solved their problem, right? That's the big thing, right? Are you asking the question, have I solved the problem that I know you have? And then if I have, am I solving it in a way that is efficient, or, whatever your design principles are? But you can do that really quickly. We've been able to drum up a really rudimentary test with 5 to 7 people within days.
Yeah, I think the only thing I'd add here is it's much shorter, but it's like, just ask them. You know, that's how you correctly identify, because we can talk ourselves into anything strategically. We can do great presentations, but if you can actually go out to the personas, to the customers you've identified, whether they're prospects or current customers, and ask them, right? So you've got the hypothesis that you believe that you've solved the problem. Go learn.
Yeah, and let me add one thing. So the presumption would be that you understand, you've defined the problem, you understand the needs for the people you're going to talk to, and then you're validating that feature set against the needs. You're not saying, do you like these features? You're saying, are they hitting the needs that you have, that we know you have, right? So you're constantly validating back to these pillars that we've talked about. And as you're getting feedback, you're evolving that solution set to ensure that you are focused on the right needs and the right problem.
All right, and the next question is from a Jonathan Wagner. And he says, do you believe that empathy maps are considered actionable, meaning that anyone can convert them to actionable steps and or use them to evaluate the solution and fulfill the pain points and goals stated in the original empathy map?
Yeah, that's interesting. I think of empathy maps as another tool to be able to capture where the customer's emotions are. And so if you remember back to both the problem statement as well as the persona, there's a lot of emotions. There's a lot of, you know, how do I feel? What do I need? What kind of is going on? And a lot of the time with an empathy map, you can capture the core. We prefer it being translated to something like an actionable persona, because taking one specific piece, which is just the emotion, and trying to extrapolate from that, kind of ignores some of the other nuances. So you end up having a journey map, and then you may end up at jobs to do, and you're putting sort of 3 or 4 different tools together. And I've done that for really complicated types of products. But if you can sort of step back and say, we're going to use a set of tools and we're going to end up with an actionable persona, all tools lead to one piece of information that everyone on the team can align and talk about, versus, you know, again, we're just trying to get the noise out of the system to say, does this piece of data that we found in this piece of tool match this other tool, and does it contradict something else? Like, try and pull the themes together in a persona is what we'd say. But absolutely, empathy maps and journey maps and jobs to be done and all these other tools are great ways of learning.
Right. And the next question is from Autumn Jones. She says, I am new to UX. After you've looked at the persona needs, what features did you ultimately create, and how did you distill those needs into however many features you created?
Yeah, you know, numbers, I guess what features did you create? Are you speaking of a particular product, or are you just saying in general, what kind of features do you ultimately create from the needs list that you create? I just want to make sure I'm answering the right question.
This might be from a list. So while Howard's finding it, I'll take a crack at this and then see if your question gets answered, Heather. Oh, there she goes. She's talking about Peter, Jane, and Angie.
Yeah, so those were, we made those up, right? What we were trying to do is demonstrate how what you observed can be translated into needs that then drive your feature discussions. And, you know, we showed a small example for more complex projects or products, like, you know, we work with a really large accounting software company, and they are highly, highly complex. For any one user, their needs are 10 to 15 needs. And we spend a lot of time on what is the most painful, what's the biggest environmental piece of environment that actually drives you know, a tougher task, or is a hurdle to solving their problem. So we spend a lot of time on prioritizing their needs and then focusing on their top need and saying what features are required to solve for this top need. So that could be, 25 different features. And the point being is you've already prioritized the needs. You got to start then hitting on the most important ones that might be most strategic, most drive the most revenue. Then there's sort of a business discussion on how you're going to prioritize those features in a way that drives growth for the business, but sustains delight or drives delight for the users. There's always this business component that you're going to have to come back to. But we don't really, it's not a one-to-one correlation, right? It's a deep discussion around needs and prioritization of those needs. And then you're going down to deep discussion around what feature ideas do we have to solve for this one need, right? And how does it all work together?
And just one add, it may be, and trying to connect it to a real life sort of products now, it may be that you don't ever prioritize someone like a Jane. We might say we just, as a business, we're not solving for her. It's based on resources. It's based on all these different factors. What you've done is you've created artifacts that everyone around there can look at and have these trade-off discussions. And that's what we're looking for groundwork, is the ability to extrapolate emotion and personal opinion to saying there's clarity here. Now let's layer on the resource limitations and everything else that we need to think about. Let's think about where we can grow. Let's think about the kind of the numbers that we need to hit. And now where do we focus? And that's all the conversations that we're trying to get to in a much clearer, more logical and customer-driven way.
That's a really great add. And I want to add one more thing onto that. The same goes for when you're prioritizing needs. Your team as a whole may say, we're not going to solve the number 3 need for Peter because, one, it's not strategic for us and it's really expensive to solve, and we'd never be able to get the product out in the next 6 months if we did. So we are going to, everyone in this room is holding hands and deciding we are not solving for need number 3 because of a business reason, but we're going to kick butt on need number 1, 2, and 4, and we're going to delight the hell out of Peter with everything else because we know we can, right? But those are conscious decisions you can make, saying we know we're not solving for number 3 need, and you're telling your leaders, here's why we're not solving this need. We've done the research. We know it's too expensive, and we need to solve these other needs first. So again, as Vidya talked about, you're getting the artifacts that enable you to make decisions, justify them, and communicate them to your leadership team with confidence. So you don't have another opinion walking in the room and overturning decisions. And
yes, we talk about this. We've got 6 chapters in the book, and one of the chapters is individualized needs, and we go into enormous detail around that. And it's not based on a case study. This talk, it kind of gives you a high level. We wanted a way to make it easily communicatable in sort of 45 minutes to an hour. But the book actually goes to a lot more detail.
Right. And our next question, we have 4 more questions. So hang there with us. It's from Logesh. Devi Sagamani, and it's kind of a 2-parter. And then I believe he's talking about your actionable insights, and he's asking, how do we first identify the right personas to begin with? And is there any max and minimum number of individual personas that we should consider?
I think Vidya and I both have some differing opinions. I mean, I've been working a lot with startups. And so I think this question depends on where you are in your business life cycle, right? If this is a new product, if it's B2B, then you're focused on one user, one decision maker, and maybe one buyer, right? If you've got 3, the lesser number of personas, the better off you're going to be in a new product. If you've got a highly complex, established SaaS product, for instance, that is not, you've got multiple, right? And so the goal, though, is always to very clearly understand your prioritization of those personas. So you may have in your SaaS product 4 or 5 different user personas in addition to your buyer or your decision maker. And what you're trying to do is say, which one is more strategic for the business? Which one is a bigger market segment? Which one is higher engagement, driving more revenue? Right? You're making business decisions around which persona is your priority, and you're always going to have to make some trade-offs. And so the goal is to establish a prioritization that your entire team understands and is data based, right? And again, if it's a startup, I say one persona, you're starting off and you're going to launch for that persona, you're going to learn and you're going to expand from there. But a more established company like TurboTax, we had, I think for TurboTax, we had 20 million users at the time. And I think we had 5 to 7 personas, but we had a product for every persona. So, or a SKU, what we called a SKU for every persona. So the goal is to prioritize and drive delight for a smaller number of personas. Otherwise, you get to feature bloat.
I want to talk about like the first part of the question was like, how do you identify them? So I'm going to go back to the hypothesis, which a lot of the time you don't know which there's right persona to start with. You may think there's like, where do I go? And there may be multiple different sort of areas you want to focus on. So using scrappy research, right? This is one of the practices, set a hypothesis saying this is the persona, we think this is it. And then go learn about them. And you may find that this really isn't, that you're finding a lot of differences. And so you might separate them, or you might find a lot of similarity, and you're actually connecting what you thought were 3 different personas into one. So you don't need to pick one to begin with. What you need to do is to have clarity around what you believe as a hypothesis are maybe 1 or more personas. And so, Heather's saying like pick one for if you're in a really early stage company. I think it's complex, and this is where we have interesting conversations where you may need to go down the path of testing with several before you actually can choose and say this is where we're going to place our bets, because you're still figuring out a lot of stuff and you're figuring out what you can do and what you can build and what their needs are and so forth. So the idea is to get as few as possible, and that's what we always agree with. So there's not a maximum or a minimum number. Just try and get it to the smallest number that you can, because you really want to focus on the most important persona, the one that's most typical. In a B2B, you may have 2 or 3 because of the complexity of your product, but try to get it to the smallest number possible.
Awesome. And our very last question from Sarah Littman, and she asks, I'm working on a new product and we have a limited user base. Is there any way to successfully reuse users for feedback?
Yes. That's a great question. Yes, use these folks over and over again. Yeah, I mean, Vidya and I, this is a challenge with B2B companies, right? It's really hard to get access to your clients, to your client users. And so what we try to do is set up what we call kind of a customer advisory group, where we solicit a set of users, X number, and then we reward them and have them as part of your advisory team. And ongoing, you're having them help you develop the product. It's a fantastic way to have an ongoing scrappy research practice, because you now have a pipeline of users that you can ask questions of, ask for feedback. We absolutely believe in that.
All right, that's it for questions. Some really amazing questions tonight. So thank you everyone for that. I'm going to hand it back off to our president, Mr. James.
Thank you. Really appreciate it, Howard. Let's have just a virtual round of applause for Howard. Thanks for facilitating that. And of course, a huge, huge thanks to Vidya and to Heather for this insightful, amazing presentation. Folks at home, if they're interested, where can they buy the book and how can they stay connected to you both?
Oh, I love that question, James. It's kind of like I was anticipating it. What we'd love to do is to point you towards productgroundwork.com. There's an Amazon link in there if you'd like to buy the book, and we'd love for you to go grab a copy. And it's something that really sort of shares just the depth of like how to do it and what it is, why it's important, and how, because we think it's so important. We're very practical, very pragmatic. It's based on all our experience, and so we hope it's helpful. And if you're interested, can reach out to us at info@productrebels.com. And there's one more thing that I just want to share really fast, which is, you know, we've built our coaching practice working with individual companies, but with Groundwork, we wanted to make it accessible for individuals to kind of be able to come into a team environment and be able to learn. And sometimes it's hard for you to convince, you know, a company to bring in an entire kind of coaching practice. So we're offering these public workshops for the very first time, and it's really fun. It's over 5 days. It's hands-on experience. It's a couple of hours a day, so it's not like a huge amount of burden, but you get to actually practice on your product, and you get one of us who will actually come in and work with you on your problem statement, on your persona, get it actionable, help you sort of translate those into needs, learn about those practices, and it's all on your product. So it's kind of, it's a really fun way of making sense of all of this and actually talking about it with people and getting feedback. And so we're starting to offer these once a month. And if you're interested, please go to that link. And the next one's coming up in March. So we'd love to have a couple of people come in and join. And if you think there's an opportunity to come into your company, please reach out to us, you know, and meet up through James, info@productrebels, or it's just Vidya or Heather at productrebels.com as well. And of course, just before we end and hand it back to James, and thank you, James, for giving us that opportunity to share that, we thrive on feedback. So there's just a couple of different questions in there. So if you wouldn't mind just going back up there and just giving us, there's a quick NPS question and a quick request for some feedback. We would really, really appreciate it. So thank you.
Brilliant. Thank you so much again for that wonderful presentation. Thank you to our sponsor, MetaLab, for help providing this Zoom. And of course, thank you to each and every one of you, whether you're in here with us in this Zoom or you're on YouTube. We can't wait to see you at our next event.